I'd like to talk about this idea of small building a little bit more in terms of what we do. This is a model that we've worked with the people in Cheticamp. They have a large Roman Catholic church, which is that darker piece of wood that you're seeing in the model there. This is a view from above. And the school is under renovation, but it's in about phase 7 of its renovation right now. It's been quite a big deal in terms of what it is. The theater then is directly above the church. The hospital is directly below it. Senior Citizen Centre, the school. So we actually identified within the people in the area. We identified this as a particular environment or endroit culture. We called it the quartier culturel, in other words, a cultural quarter of the town, and actually started to think about how we would reinforce this with small, ephemeral, small seasonal buildings. So the theater that I'll show you in a minute is the yellow up on the top right there. The green represents a potential farmer's market. The ocean is right on the left there. That's the dark area. But what we're trying to talk about is kind of reinforcing a walking environment around the existing cultural institutions of the town. So this is the little theater that we built. It seats 180. It's something that the town itself felt it could use, this kind of summer nature of the building. We picked up the working vernacular of the town. We generate a kind of simple project. This one cost about $13,000 to build. So we were able to kind of create this environment to reinforce this cultural area around the town itself. The other thing that I'd like to emphasize is that we found that through this kind of working with the theater people, that I should mention that Paul has now gone on to be a kind of economic development person for the town itself. So he's moved from a theater entrepreneur into a kind of local community economic development person. And so he's taken some of the lessons learned from his kind of creative work with the theater. But the other thing that we found is in working with the theater itself, and this is an example of the bunkhouses that we built for their theater camp. These are all assembled pieces that are done in the local high school workshop. They have to go in through a door. They get set up every summer, and this sleeps about 20 kids. This is something that, again, we're working with our students to show them about the issue about multiplication, how you'd make things repetitive, how you have this idea of interchangeable parts, accuracy, that kind of thing. But again, this is something that cost about $18,000, was very simple to build. We built it in 3 weeks, 2 weeks actually, designed it in a week. So it's something that we can bring a lot of forces to bear on these situations and kind of support what the local theater people are doing. We found that also that when we worked with the theater people that they actually were, just by brainstorming with them, we realized that one of the problems of the town was that in fact it's not a political entity. Its municipality is some 3 hours away down the coast where the kind of town council meets in this kind of amalgamation of many things that end up generating this kind of weird geography. But the town itself was really reluctant or really hesitant to engage in the activity of planning for the town because, like mentioned many times before, there's some difficulty about how rural towns come together. We found that these things that the students built were quite unthreatening things for people. They had an appearance of success or failure didn't really matter. The fact that they created something that was quite unusual, something to talk about, the fact that we were satisfied with our agenda. But then it turned out that the theater people themselves started to become interested after talking with us about this whole issue about how you work in towns and how you plan, so we actually, as a kind of collaboration between architects and theatrical people, we realized that we had a really interesting vehicle about how you work with town planning. So we actually used the theater and the way of creating a play as an activity to plan the town. So that in fact we attracted people to the events to show them the thing that we were going to build. But the other thing that we did in addition to that was we created a situation where the people reenacted the history of the building of the town. And the actors were playing nuns and priests and that sort of thing that were active historical figures in the making of the town. And what people understood that by putting these pieces on a big plan of the gymnasium floor, that was actually an activity that created a lot of laughter and a lot of participation. And as an architect and somebody who's often gone into public meetings where these are kind of dreadful events, where you actually are feeling like you're defensive about some sort of thing, this was a much more active environment that the theater people were able to create. So we've realized out of this kind of potential innovation about how we can work on planning these about actually helping Cheticamp to plan itself. So I think that, I mean, those are just some instances of the work that are represented in the paper, but I mean, it's a completely, probably different take than we've seen throughout the rest of the day. But I just wanted to mention that there is actually a lot to be gained by this kind of creative collaboration between two creative disciplines with an agenda of economic development.
Thank you. The floor for questions for Ted, please. And we'll start with Jacqueline.
Quick comment and a question. The comment is that I was interested in what you were saying there at the last about the planning process and the graphic representations on the gym floor and so on. That's very consistent with what we found in working with communities and the various projects that we do. We use concept mapping and visual mapping all the time because it reduces misunderstandings and promotes consensus and resolution in a way that oral and flip charting just doesn't do.
Right.
The question I had was, architects obviously are also dealing with geography, and I don't know which came first in Cheticamp, the culture or the sweat. But you know, what's the operative thing that influences the geography there? Because in the summer, Cheticamp is beautiful. In the fall and winter, they have this ugly thing called the sweat, which is a hurricane that never gets reported really outside of the area. They get them regularly. They send out sweat warnings.
Well, in fact, that little theater has stood now for about 7 years, and it's sustained 250 kilometer-an-hour winds. It was part of the original design that we tried to actually make it a bit more transparent to the wind. Like part of the design of that is to allow the wind in and not to resist it quite as much. But we also faced it southeast into the Suet, and we used the playground slide, which we had originally tried to lift out and realized it had, there's one of these old spiral yellow slides that it had about 6 cubic feet of concrete that was holding it down. So after trying to dig it out, we said, what are we doing? We're trying to dig this thing out. Why don't we just use it? So we used it, and we anchored the building to it. So now the kids come into the theater on the slide, and their parents walk beside them, right? So, yeah. So, I mean, a lot of what we do is we try and work with the existing situation. And one of the interesting things about Cheticamp is the wind. I mean, it's phenomenal. In fact, the projects that we're working on right now, we've done a few prototypes of it and this picks up on the low-tech idea, that we figured out. There was a conversation earlier about wind farms. One of the problems with Cheticamp is it's too windy for windmills. All the windmills shut down because the wind's too high. Too much, actually. There's one windmill up there that's having a real problem that way. But the other thing is that how does the town celebrate this fact? So what we've tried to do in the projects that we're working on, some of the small projects we're working on right now, is I challenge my students to translate wind into light. And so we're using windmills to light the streets of the main streets of town. So each sign now has a windmill or a wind object that generates the power that lights it at night and stores the battery. And so it starts to celebrate the wind of the town in the lighting of the town that it never had before. Right? So.
That's beautiful. Let's have a couple more questions, please. And I like the idea of you said he was your colleague is a theater specialist who's become an economic developer.
That's right.
So that's going to be the new training for rural community economic developers. They have to go through the arts to qualify. But anyway, let's just get some other questions. Okay, Helen?
I don't know if you mentioned, other than Shirk, the funding behind some of the work?
Oh, yeah. What we found is that local funding is actually quite available. For instance, when we were building the theater, the local credit union threw in $500, no problem. The local co-op store who sold us the lumber actually took their $7,000 bill and reduced it to like $1,000 when they saw what was happening. So there's local funding for it. We've gotten funding from the Canada Council for some of this work. The current project we're working on, which is an interpretation of a salt marsh, we're creating a camera obscura and we're building it out of ceramics. And so we're working with Shaw Brick, local manufacturer. The province has given us $25,000 to build it. So, these are sort of things that, based on the reputation, I mean, we've never gone to a COA, we might go to a COA, but a COA actually gave the money to the theater company to put that slate there. So it's a kind of multiple, when we credit people, it's about 20 people long in all of our projects.
That's actually an excellent question and response. We haven't today had an opportunity to look at policy issues in any depth, but clearly the role of public-private partnerships and the role of both federal and provincial funding in many of these initiatives is crucial. They would not proceed without that very important set of funding. Can we thank Dr. Ted Cavanagh?